Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. I am really excited for today's episode because I have with me the one and only Kathleen Long. Kathleen is the Chief Revenue Officer at RepairPal. RepairPal in general has been an amazing partner of WrenchWay for a long time, and really just always have fun talking to the folks at RepairPal. Everybody's incredibly nice. We've actually had Kathleen on, this has been a while ago, but had you on a webinar with us, 7 Secrets to a Successful Auto Repair Shop. We're actually going to put a link to that for those of you that want to watch that. But very long overdue to have Kathleen on the podcast itself. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jay. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
As we record this, you just got back from Women in Auto Care. I believe it was in Palm Springs, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Tell me a little bit, how did the week go?
So the week was amazing. Anytime I have an opportunity to be in a room with, with women who are working in the automotive industry, there's always going to be great conversations and so on. But this was the best attended Women in Auto Care yet, which is great. And so, pretty big focus on the aftermarket for women in auto care. I also, on the flip side, I participate in Women in Automotive as well, which is in the automotive retail space. So I get lots of opportunities to, talk with women across the industry. And it's great because women are still only about 20% of the aftermarket. And so, and obviously we're over 50% of the population. So there's a gap there. And, that's something that we're actively working on. But also, just talking to women about opportunities, their stories, and how they can really make the most of their careers, and how we can encourage, obviously, something you're passionate about, Jay, young people, women in particular, but actually all young people, to feel like automotive is like a place for them. And so otherwise, we're not going to bring in the best and brightest new talent, which is something that I know you and I are both passionate about. So spent quite a bit of time in the last 3 days talking about that.
It's always fun to come back from those and kind of fill your bucket and really come back with some ideas. And I just watching from afar, seeing the level of talent and the amount of talented ladies that were down there, just incredibly impressive. And it continues to gain momentum, continues to really, I think, push the ball in the right direction, and really inspirational for me. Now, I want to talk about you before we get into the actual content of the podcast. You've taken on a big role at RepairPal, and I want to know really what led you to this point, and really kind of get to dive into your background a little bit. So how did it start? How did you get into this business?
Yeah, so so one of the things that we were talking about at Women in Auto Care is, like, how do we make people at the first stage in their career say, like, automotive's the place for me? I did not say that about myself in the first stage of my career. So my dad was actually an automotive mechanic when I was a little girl, which means that I spent a lot of time in probably 3 different situations, actually. One was either broken down by the side of the road, because everybody knows that auto mechanics are more willing than others to drive cars with problems, because they're like, well, if something happens, I'll just fix it on the fly. So that's one. 2, I spent a lot of time in, independent repair shops where, my dad was always in, like, talking to his buddies, and he'd have to put, like, his hands over my eyes so I wouldn't see the nude calendar on the wall, right? And then I would sit in a corner and read a book and wait for him to be done talking about whatever he was talking about. Or we would spend an extraordinary amount of time at the parts store, either to repair the car that was broken at the side of the road, or, because he just had to add something new to the garage. And he eventually transitioned out of being an automotive, and he went to Boeing and worked on a slightly bigger machine, right? Wow. But still translating some of those same skills. And he retired from there. He's in his 80s now. But I never felt like, those experiences never made me feel like, oh, automotive, that's where I need to be. In fact, it never even occurred to me. So I was in fintech, and I worked in payroll, money movement. I worked at, Bill.com most recently before coming to RepairPal. So I left there, and I left without a job. And so I was pursuing things that were in the same space. I'm an ACH expert. I know all kinds of things about merchant services and fees and money movement and all kinds of stuff. And so I thought, well, I've been at this for almost 20 years. Like, this is what I know. This is what I do. And out of left field comes this recruiter. So not even anybody in my network, and says, well, we're looking for somebody who understands customers and small business, which I've been focused on small business for most of my career. And, can really facilitate like moving data back and forth, set up, programs, good at operations, all these different things. And I said, well, yeah, those are my skill sets, but I don't know anything about, fixing cars. Like, this doesn't make sense. But I really liked the recruiter. And so he was like, well, just really give it a shot. I think you'll like these people. I think you'll really enjoy the CEO. He's very development and growth minded and all these things. And so pretty soon I was pretty attracted to the company, to the values, to, the management team at the time. I thought, well, how cool would it be to just like take a leap off a cliff and do something totally different? It'll test my leadership in a new way. I'll have to figure out, I won't be the expert in the room anymore. So I'll have to figure out new skills, new way of being and all that. So I just thought, yeah, I'll give this a shot. And obviously if I don't like it, it's not like I don't have that 20-year background still. I can always go back. So needless to say, I've been at RepairPal now for almost 9 years. So it's the longest gig I've ever had. I'm usually a 3 or 4 year kind of typical San Francisco Bay Area kind of gal, like your options vest and you bounce, right? But I haven't done that because I think there's something special here. And because I think the industry needs people like me, which is to say, I'm a woman, I'm an outlier, and I have a really loud voice, so I can speak for people who maybe don't. I think it's an industry that's ripe for all kinds of disruption. And I think those of us that are here and that want to make this a great place for everyone, we need to stay here and we need to make it that place and we need to make it awesome for people. But, as an ancillary side note, my dad was really delighted by this. And on day one, he called me up and he gave me all sorts of like advice, information. He was talking about transmissions. I was like, Dad, I'm not working on cars, but anyway, so it's really been kind of lovely for my relationship with my dad. He couldn't be prouder. And I only wish like he had encouraged me or exposed me to, other aspects of it, potentially earlier on.
Yeah, I think it's crazy when you come from outside the industry to understand, and even for those of us that have grown up in the industry, to comprehend the amount of opportunity that is in this space. There are, endless amounts of opportunity in this business. And the fact that you found what I feel too, from an outside perspective, is just such a perfect fit. Like you, when I think of RepairPal, I think of you. I mean, you really put a face to it. And I think that's such a huge compliment to you. The other thing that, again, from afar that I look at and am so impressed by is your ability to speak and to go into that conference and be able to speak in front of a lot of people, right? It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And I think for those that have done it, know the preparation that goes into it and know how difficult it can be at times, but how fun it is also. So I'm curious as to your thoughts on speaking in public and really bringing your presence to a stage.
So yeah, look, I in a different life, I might have done something like a lot more creative. I love to write, I love to read, and I do love to perform. And so for me, being on stage feels great. That the fact that I get to express myself in this way, that someone cares about what I have to say, and they're going to put me on stage, and they don't necessarily know what's going to come out of my mouth, but they know it's all love. And so for me to be able to do that is fantastic. I also know that a lot of people are terrified by it as opposed to energized by it. And so I actually, last year at Women in Auto Care, I gave a talk on how to, overcome your fear of public speaking. So I do have a workshop that I'm more than happy to reprise or do for folks, because I think there was like a Seinfeld episode where they said that most people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying, right? And so, so therefore, like, you'd rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy at a funeral or something like that. But yeah, so, so for a lot of people, it really is this primal fear. And this year, My opening talk was on really networking, making connection. Another thing people are like deathly afraid of, right? Because small talk makes us all kind of anxious. And then I also got an opportunity, just, quick 20 minutes to talk a little bit about, career growth and sort of, my thoughts about that and things like that. So they let me speak not just once, but twice this year, which is sort of amazing. So anyway, I felt really good about that. And I do, a fair amount of speaking about a variety of different things. And so more so here in this industry at this moment than I've ever done previously in my career, although I've been doing it on and off, over the last, oh my God, every time I talk about my career, the number goes up, almost 30 years, right? I'm getting old, Jay, but yeah, so I really feel privileged that I'm able to do this because, again, I'm still not this under the hood expert, right? So when my dad's going on about the transmissions, I have no idea. I just go, I don't know if he has any idea anymore either, right? He hasn't worked on a car in many years, but yeah. So but I have something that I think I can share, on the business side, certainly on people and leadership and how people can think about their own careers in this space. And look, no matter what you know or don't know about a car as a machine, obviously there's a place in this industry for you, which is pretty cool. But yeah, the number one thing I tell people about public speaking is you probably won't die, right?
Probably.
Yeah. I have to say probably because I tell the story of the first marathon. So if you think about like the worst speech that was ever delivered, it was the guy that ran the first marathon. He was running from one Greek city to another to talk about the fact that the battle was won and there was no need to continue because, there was no cell phones or anything. So you had to stop the fighting somehow. And you had to say, well, we won, we're good. Like we don't have to do this now. And so he ran 26 miles straight. But back in those days, like this was a job that you could have, which was simply to deliver news and you would run it. And it was actually like his third marathon in like 4 days because he'd been running back and forth. And so he delivered like the "We are victorious," his little speech in front of the king and the court or whatever. And then he died. So he died, but most people don't. So the lesson is just don't run a marathon before you get on stage. You'll be totally fine.
That is great. So one thing you mentioned there, and I saw a lot of people posting about this from being down at the conference, was the necessity to get out of your comfort zone and network. And maybe not even as it relates to networking, because what I'll say is, I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten worse at networking. I feel like when I was a young professional, like I would get out and it didn't matter who it was. I was just curious to learn about people. And I think over time, maybe that's waned a little bit. And I've got to get back into the habit of really having that desire to go out and want to talk to people. But I almost wonder how this relates to just our general psychology of day-to-day life. And when you look at a typical shop, you see some level of infighting or differences of maybe communication style, a technician versus maybe a service manager or service writer, and a lot of, I don't know, like maybe a lot of disconnect. But I also wonder if some of that is because of social angst. Maybe somebody doesn't want to talk to other people, or I know myself, I get pretty comfortable with this little device in my hands right here. And I think that becomes almost a barrier to just general communication. Technology is a beautiful thing, but I think maybe sometimes that can be a barrier. Do you see any connection between that networking and really maybe getting out of your shell to network and maybe just general social anxiety in a workplace?
Yes, I see a lot of connections, actually. So networking, we think of as this very specific thing, right? And you picture it in your head, and there's a room, and it's probably in a hotel, and it's got a terrible carpet, and there's somebody standing at one end serving only wine and beer when what you really want is a shot. And then you're walking around with this, glass of wine, and everyone's wearing ill-fitting business suits, and you're talking about the weather, right? But that's not necessarily what networking is. It's sometimes, right? And look, I'm happy to be in those rooms. I will liven them up and make them not that in about 15 seconds. And everyone can hear me because I'm really loud. But I think, in a work situation, there's still a necessity to build relationships. And a lot of people don't look at that as like, a necessity at work. Like I hear all the time, I don't go to work to make friends. Actually, yes, you do. In fact, that's your first job, is to figure out who the people are that you're working with, who are your, what I call critical associates at work, who can you not do your job without. So if you're a technician, you can't do your job without the service writer. They're the ones who are going to bring you the information that you need to actually execute. And then you have to give them information back in order to have that linkage with you and the customer, right? Same, your manager is one of your critical associates, obviously. But there are other people in the business, maybe your parts runner or something like that, that you're absolutely dependent on. And so first things first, and I said this in the networking class, but it's true at work, you don't do anything alone. Even if you're in the back working on the car, sort of quote unquote by yourself, right? You're doing that work because somebody else made the car, wrote the tech specs for the car, published the TSB that you're currently remediating, all of these things, right? There were a bunch of other people that actually were involved in the job that you're about to do, even when you're engaged in solo work. And then at some point, you're going to have to communicate that work out to other people in order to actually complete the job, which is to give a working car back to a satisfied customer, right? And you're sort of a piece of that. So networking at work, and that's why the word work is in it, right? I think is key. And so, it's social anxiety. It's the fact that sometimes we look at, scarcity principles at work and work. Maybe there's only one star, one person who's getting called out. We want to be that person, so we compete rather than cooperate. Or, other things that come into play is like, this is not my sort of person. So then we create this very sort of narrow range or way of being, where a little box where if you're one of my people, I put you in there and then I'll talk to you or hang out with you at lunchtime. And if you're outside of that box, then I don't talk to you and then you're on my nerves and all of these things, right? So we're not assuming like the best intent of other people. And we don't have defined different levels on which we can deal with people. So look, if I'm talking with you, Jay, actually, honestly, I could go on for hours. You're in my box. You're one of my people, right? So it's super easy to have a conversation with you. There are other people in the industry, and look, I'm partnered with some of them, no names, obviously, right? We're not each other's sort of people. But that doesn't mean that we don't have things to learn from each other. That doesn't mean that I don't want to have like a wonderful, warm, like collegial relationship. That doesn't mean that I don't want to, engage with you at an event, or that I don't want to sit across a table from you and work out business problems. It simply means that you're probably not my first choice for the beer on Friday night. Like, all people being in the same, area or whatever, right? And that's okay. So if we have levels on which we deal with people, and all of those levels are infused with like our best intentions, kindness, and a genuine desire to be able to work effectively, rather than having like one box of I do get along with these people and I don't with these others, then that works better. So the metaphor I use, which maybe resonates a little bit more with women than men, but you can bear with me, is like you're a mermaid, right? So when you're on shore, you have legs and you can hang out with people there and have very sort of surfacey relationships. You can play around, if you don't want to grow legs, you can play around with your fins in like shallow water. And then when you find your kind of people, then of course you spend a longer amount of time and you go into deep water with them, and that's cool, right? But if you think about people at those different levels, and you have some kind of metaphor for that, and you assume the best intent always, then you'll be able to create those relationships. And ultimately, not only does your job get easier, not only are you more successful, but you're happier. Not liking people and feeling bad about them takes energy, and that energy creates angst that washes over your entire life. So don't do it.
Join top shops, dealers, and schools across the country to promote and improve technician careers. WrenchWay memberships help shops and dealerships engage with schools, improve technician hiring and retention, and make better business decisions with access to useful data. Shops use WrenchWay to build relationships with and support multiple schools on one platform. Show technicians why they're a great place to work. Stay up to date on best practices. Attract passive candidates. Tap into WrenchWay's growing network of industry professionals. And make better business decisions with meaningful industry data. Want to learn more about WrenchWay shop memberships? Visit WrenchWay.com and click on the For Shops tab or contact us at info@WrenchWay.com. Link is in the show notes.
I think that might be why we see maybe some level of unhappiness in this industry, and if you go, and I do think it's the boisterous minority that are on these, Facebook message boards and are saying a lot of negative things about our industry. And a lot of it is with anger, right? Like we just had I had talked about and put a LinkedIn post out where somebody had put a comment on one of our TikTok posts. And I talk about this all the time. If we want to uplift our industry, technicians and service advisors and service managers, we need to take our professionalism up maybe just a notch, right? We need to act like pros. If we want to get paid like pros, we need to act like pros. And when we just reading the comments on the WrenchWay TikTok account, and we put a lot of really cool content out there. Our marketing team does a phenomenal job. But there was one comment that really stuck out to me in that an individual in a shop said, I've successfully talked 3 young people out of coming into this industry that were working here. And I'm like, that is so damaging. And that might be more attitude than communication, but did we drive that person's anger with lack of communication over the years? Or was it, maybe not getting in the deep end of the pool or the deep end of the ocean with their crew and really causing that infighting? Or maybe it's just a mental lapse, or maybe just not that attitude that we need in order to get that person to feel warm and fuzzy about this industry. And I'm interested to get your take on that part. If we struggle with this in the industry, not just with women, but with everybody, right? Where we fight this perception that it's this kind of rough and tough industry, yet there's so many cool things that we can do in this industry. And I feel like we almost internally drive that anger because of maybe lapse in communication or just not, just not fully understanding each other. And maybe I'm off base there, but it feels like some of this is preventable.
Oh, I 100% think it's preventable. That sounds to me like a person who feels like a lack of agency or control or lack of a voice in their role. And so they're very quietly thinking, like, how can I turn people away or have my, my moment of satisfaction? That sounds like a person who either isn't being invited, doesn't feel safe, or isn't taking the onus on themselves to actually have the communication that matters so that they can feel happier in their situation, right? And so when we're out of control, then what do? We take to anonymous forums and, we then, talk garbage about the industry that we're in or the job that we're at or whatever, because we don't have what we feel is the space to do that directly to our boss, to our, leadership team, or, to leave a situation. And look, not all companies and cultures and all of that in the automotive industry obviously are created equal. And that's why you created WrenchWay as well, as for people to be able to highlight, hey, here's all the things we're doing right for our crew. Here's how we're standing for our technicians. Here's, what it's like to work here. So look, there's a lot of, especially for technicians, you're in short demand. If you feel this way about your environment, okay, so I hope people don't get angry at me for saying this, but leave. You are in such high demand. There is an environment for you. There are so many phenomenal shops, dealerships, places for you to work. I sit in rooms all the time at these conferences with people who are, engaging for 3-4 days, grabbing content, not about how to be technically better at their jobs, but how to be better leaders, how to create cultures, how to work with employees so that they have the work-life balance and can go to their kids, soccer game, whatever. There are employers out there who are trying to make this work for their employees. And they're saying like, oh, we need to hire, high quality talent. So assuming that you're at the top of your game, technically you're very proficient or whatever, the world is your oyster. You should feel phenomenal. You should be encouraging all kinds of people to join the industry because there's a shortage and, really, you are a valuable gemstone. that's how you should feel, right? So, in other aspects of the industry, I'm not quite sure what the statistics are, but in the skilled labor side, like there is a dearth of people to work there. And so when people are saying like, I'm really, really unhappy, and it's not with the actual process of fixing the vehicle, like they're skilled correctly, they enjoy the skill and the actual technical aspect of their job, then it comes down to culture. And so then what I would say is, like, there are options for you.
Yeah, I think that was, you hit that on the head. I mean, that was a big reason why we built WrenchWay in the first place, is it wasn't up to us to decide a good shop from a bad shop. It's up to us to be able to give options to a technician in the hopes that they stay in the industry, right? And that's one of the things where we see when that person gets really angry, they start to maybe assume that all shops are exactly the same. And similar to what you guys do on the consumer side too, right? Showing that there are, I mean, frankly, there's shops that are better than others, right? There's shops that put in the time. There's shops that have better management practices. And you mentioned it, the ones that are in that women in auto care, if they're in any type of conference and they're trying to get better, typically that's probably a pretty good shop. And I will say there are a lot of shops out there that just aren't proactive and frankly aren't as good as some of them that put the time in. And I'm interested to hear if you see maybe a correlation there as well. If those people that are going to those conferences and putting in the work, do you see that difference? Do you see that gap between them and maybe the rest of them that don't?
Yeah, I do. And I over the years too, I've seen this, and it's not just unique to automotive, but I've seen this over and over. And again, I used to work with sort of everybody in the US who had like 150 or fewer employees was my, potential customer at my last gig, right? So I've worked with a lot of small businesses. And what I find is businesses that are interested in investing in the right, high quality technology inside of their business, ones that are really radically focused on customer service, right? So as a consumer, you're having a great experience there. Ones that are kind of investing in their, in their marketing and their public presence, that are thinking about how are the ways that we show up great in the industry. You have to worry less as an employee when you're joining one of those, because customer service and employee culture are two sides of the same coin. So if you know how to treat people well externally, chances are you're doing that internally as well, because you know that you can't do that if you have dissatisfied employees. You're never going to be able to create a good customer outcome, and vice versa. So those two things are kind of a virtuous cycle. So, when I do, webinars or speaking engagements around customer service, to me, there's no way to talk about that without employees. And on the flip side, when I talk about employee retention, there's no way to talk about that without talking about customer service, marketing presence, and making sure that you've got that all coming together so that your values as a business are reflected both externally and internally, because that's all part of how you deliver as a business. And so I think that's incredibly important. And I do see that happening. I heard a couple sessions this year from some shop owners about that. And look, I see, we have franchise dealers on our platform at this point as well. And I see this in the franchise dealer world as well. Certainly they've got the equipment, tools, training, all the stuff that the OEM provides. But culture is still up to the individual dealership. And the level of customer service and transparency and all of that they want to have, directly reflects, how they're, kind of managing their employees, the tools that they're giving their employees to, to feel great about their day and to create success and all of that. So I see that over and over and over again. And I think it's not as hard as maybe some people might think. And look, maybe in rural areas, it's a little more challenging or whatever, but I think it's not as hard as some people think to find, like that amazing situation that's going to renew or create your belief in automotive to begin with. And the people who are passionate about this industry, by the way, and again, I feel qualified to speak about this because I've seen so many different industries over the course of my career. The people that are passionate about this industry are passionate on a whole nother level, versus other industries. And so if you align yourself with an organization that exemplifies that passion, you're going to be in a much better spot.
You hit on a lot of really, really great points there. One of which I think is important to point out is that one of the most common reasons, if not the top reason, an employee leaves a business is because of their manager. And I think for a long time in our industry, it was, as my good friend George Aaron said, the ASC Education Foundation always says, they promote you to a level of incompetence, right? And I think a lot of times in the past, we would take a technician, slide them up into that service manager role because they were a good technician, and say, all right, here you go, it's all yours, and not give them really any training or any insight on how to do their job, and just assume they're going to be good because they were good in the shop. I think we're getting a little bit better as an industry. I think we still have a long way to go, but from what you've seen, do you have any advice for maybe those managers with more of a technical background, or just general leadership lessons that we can learn in a shop to try and make the lives of our people better?
Yeah, so look, I think if you have both a strong people focus and a technical background, right, then you can be a rock star leader.
Yes.
But I think, if I had to make a choice, right, if someone came to me and said, I've got someone with amazing technical skills at whatever they're about to be leading, but they've got, very, very low leadership acumen, or I've got someone with super high leadership acumen, but they don't have like really any of the technical skills, but they're overall, good, solid process and leadership person, which do you choose? I'm going to choose the leadership person all day, every day, without hesitation, without a question, no matter how technical the job is, because a lot of people think of it as like a soft skill. And then when you hear soft skill, you think, ooh, soft skill, like not as important as a, hard skill, right? Or a technical skill. But actually leadership is everything. And if we didn't think that, then why are we fighting so bitterly every election season over who's the president? Actually, leadership always matters. And when you see, when you see an organization that's struggling or that's flailing or whatever, from a culture perspective, or employees are, bleeding out or whatever, you've got to start with the leadership, that employee's leadership, but flowing all the way up. And, and what's happening there, so that you can trace the source of the issue. And so I think, look, taking someone who's super technical, who wants that leadership role, right? So if I've got someone who I think exhibits leadership capabilities or strengths, but they say to me, I don't know if I want to lead people, I never, ever, ever put them in a leading people position. You have to want it. You have to want to have, because the impact and the power that you then have over one of the most important aspects of someone's life, which is, their career, their way of making money, their way of supporting their family. I'm not going to put anybody in that role who's not, really ready to grab onto that with both hands. And then what you've got to do is support them so that they understand the gravity of the responsibility. They're ready for the responsibility, and they understand their role in creating the culture, the team environment, and also the accountability that you're looking for in your business. So it's not all just, soft, nurturing, right? It's also creating an accountability so that everyone knows what they're responsible for and they can do their best work.
Any advice on the accountability side? I think that might be one of the hardest parts in our industry is, and especially if you came from the shop up front, where all of a sudden you have to now keep your buddies accountable for getting work done, or maybe not even in a shop. This is something we talk about within WrenchWay, right? Is being accountable for your job and your performance. And I think it can be such a difficult conversation to have, or it doesn't have to be, right? Like, I think setting expectations is such an important piece so that there's clarity on what they're actually being held accountable to. I think there's a lot of failure there from a lot of businesses, not just shops, but failure to kind of set the groundwork and set the expectation of what you are holding them accountable for.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you've heard the saying, if you don't measure it, it doesn't matter, right? So, for shops in particular, and I think dealerships are probably a little better at this from what I observed, they are very metrics driven, and that's awesome. But a place where oftentimes shops aren't in the same league is how they're looking at their business and measuring it. Or they think, well, I've got high performing, bought in employees, so it doesn't matter as much. But actually over and over and over again, somebody will come in, help a shop institute the right measurements, and then suddenly, the productivity skyrockets, the average repair order skyrockets, all that. And they didn't replace the people, and they didn't go through some, gigantic change, right? It's really about creating the visibility, because otherwise, as humans, we get trapped in our own stories, right? So I have a good call, a bad call. Suddenly that, the emotion of that becomes like my whole world. And I'm not able to see the entire landscape of the business to understand like what's happening. And so I'm going to use anecdotes to kind of drive my behavior, which may or may not, reflect. Like, one example I heard actually at the Women in Auto Care conference that a shop owner shared is that her technicians were saying to her often, you're bringing us cars that are too new. That's why we're not able to, do some of these upsells or whatever. The cars are too new. So, okay. So she started measuring the average age of the car that was coming into her business. Right. And she discovered the average age of the car in her business is like 13 years old. So the cars are not too new. Right. But they're thinking to that one, loss that they had when they were trying to write service of the car that, was still covered by factory warranty. So they're only able to do maintenance on it or whatever. Right. And so, so that became their whole world, and they weren't looking at the broad spectrum of actually there's a lot of opportunities that were missing. So she started measuring it by advisor, and lo and behold, they started writing more service. Like, it's kind of amazing how that works. So I think, having those measurements in place so that you are starting from an understanding of where you're at today, and then you're able to take that in increments forward, right? So you're not setting an unrealistic standard based on where people are at now. And what they're capable of. And then, really getting buy-in from people. So it's like, oh, hey, Jay, I appreciate that you're at 40% here. I need you to get to 50. Does that feel like something that you're able to accomplish? Because if I don't get you to say, yes, you think you can do that, guess what? You're probably not going to do it.
Right.
So where you're just superimposing standards on people, I think that gets tough. And look, like you said, this is true for every industry, every job ever, every business ever, and so then I got your buy-in, and then now we're going to work on this together. And then if I see that you have, behaviors or habits that are standing in the way of you getting to your goal, now I'm your cheerleader. We both bought into this goal. It's now your goal, not mine. And then I'm saying to you, okay, well, you're at 48%. So here's how I help you get to 50, because these two things that you're doing, if you tweak them, it will change your outcome. So I think it's that process, right? Which, is just really like a wash, rinse, repeat. So it's like measure, execute, iterate.
That's good stuff. I like that. And I think going back to the communication side, this is something that a lot of leaders could help themselves out in a lot of ways, in my opinion, which is being able to be transparent on the front side. And I think being a technician, I started off as a technician. I never knew what was going on in the front, right? I didn't know what a P&L looked like. I didn't know, anything about the front other than the one number that I was getting judged by. And I feel like service leaders could do so much better of a job of sitting down and explaining to their teams what it's all about, right? What, these are the numbers that me as your manager, I'm getting judged on these numbers, and being able to just be transparent about it. I think doing so helps you pull down a lot of boundaries. It's not me versus you. It's, hey, let's work together because I've got goals to hit. You've got goals to hit. Your goals are ultimately going to help me get my goals. And that's why I need to push you to be better. And I think if leadership can sit down and truly be transparent with their team, I think that goes such a long way in building trust and just building that camaraderie of being on the same team. Yet so few, and I shouldn't say so few, there's a lot of room for improvement in our industry, in my opinion, with that transparency that would drive a lot of happiness.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. I was standing for transparency back at a time where it was considered to be like more revolutionary. Look, I just used to lead call centers back in the early days of my career, right? And sharing, everyone's metrics sort of in an overall meeting with staff and saying, here's where everyone is at. Here's where our team collectively is at. Here's where our upstream partners are, our downstream partners are. And here's where we can improve. That was considered radical. And so I would tell people, I'd say, look, you're doing your job. Like we'd all sit in the same room, right? So I'm like, you're doing your job. You're literally sitting next to people. Your performance is not a secret. So, we're going to talk about performance, and we're going to talk about it broadly, not to call anyone out any one way or the other, but just so we understand how the entire system is functioning and what we can collectively do to make this better. So we would get agreement that this is how we were going to operate, and then we would operate that way. But I think also, people want to feel like, okay, so I sit in this desk, or I'm working on, these cars in the bay, right? Or this is my task. I'm a lube technician, right? So I'm doing the same thing kind of, day in and day out, whatever. But then how is my overall effort rolling up to what the business wants to accomplish? What are our, profits? How does this month look versus last month? How are we feeling about this? Why are we hiring more people? Why are we not hiring more people? Like what's that conversation? We all want to feel like we're a part of something bigger. That's just true in life, right? So I think if you can understand, what your efforts are producing, it's that much more motivating. And then, as you think about growing your career, obviously, if you ever wanted to own your own shop someday, or if you have aspirations, you're going to need to understand, to your point, how P&L, works, and how you look at different roles in the business and how you measure those roles and things like that. And so we're not just preparing people for what they do today. We also have an obligation to the industry and so on to prepare them for what they do tomorrow. There was a stat I saw where the average age of a shop owner is something like 68.
Yeah.
So, what I say sometimes, and usually, I'm talking to a man, so I say, dude, don't you ever want to retire? And if you do, right, like, don't you want to share this information with, with the people who are working for you? Do you really want to sell to, a large group that may or may not like take tender care of your business the way you intended? Or wouldn't it be amazing if there's an employee or two that's just sort of ready to kind of say, hey, me, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, and a lot of shop owners that I talked to, that was precisely their situation. They took it over from, previous owner, or bought it from someone, very intentionally, because it was the sort of business that they wanted to operate. So that's how we create legacies around culture, is really by bringing people into what the leadership looks like, and what's beyond sort of their very narrow today focus.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Wrench. At this time, we would like to take a moment to highlight this episode's sponsor, WyoTech. WyoTech is one of the nation's leading automotive, collision, and diesel training schools found in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. With hands-on training, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, their graduates are career-ready in 9 months. WyoTech offers 3 core programs in automotive, diesel, and collision. WyoTech also offers 6 specialty programs in high-performance powertrains, trim and upholstery, advanced diesel, applied service management, street rod, and chassis fabrication. Countless opportunities for students to work with their hands, never online. Check out WyoTech in Laramie, Wyoming by visiting wyotech.edu. WyoTech starts students 4 times a year, allowing many opportunities for students to start their career in the trades. America is built on the trades and needs skilled technicians now. WyoTech is the place to get the training you need for the jobs America needs today. Know your brand, forge your path. wyotech.edu.
I think you can go a long way in building trust if you can get your team to tell you what they're actually thinking, right? And there might be employees out there that are terrified of telling their boss that they want to start their own business, some rightfully so. I know there's still leadership and management and ownership that is threatened by that. And if somebody says they want to open their own shop, maybe that conversation doesn't go very well, right? Or maybe they've seen somebody else try to have that conversation and have it not go very well. When you start to push back on somebody's kind of hopes and dreams, I feel like that's where you start to build that distrust, and maybe some of that anger comes because somebody doesn't feel like they can come freely talk to you. And I know in my career, I've had that scenario myself, right? And not feeling comfortable about talking about what I truly had goals for and aspirations for. And when you get to that point to where you can't freely talk about it, it's every man for themselves, every woman for themselves, right? They're just kind of, it's me against you. And to me, you're doing yourself a disservice as a leader if you're not welcoming those conversations, even if it's something you don't want to hear. Because if you don't, you're just going to get stuff hidden from you. And it drives distrust on both sides. There's something that's not being talked about. And until that stuff's out on the table, how are you going to have an honest conversation?
Yeah, and I think, it's one of those things where it's seemingly like a paradox, but sometimes the harder you're trying to hold on to something, the more likely you are to lose it. And as a little kid, I used to love to catch like bugs and frogs and, all kinds of little creatures. Like I lived in the Pacific Northwest for a while, so I was always, looking for salamanders and little things I could put in jars. But the more closely you can find those things, the shorter their lifespan, right? So I think about employees the same way. So, you've got an employee that comes to you and they say, I want your job. Or they come to you and they say, I want to start my own business one day, or I want to go into competition with you. I want to open a shop down the street, whatever they want to say to you. Couple things you've got to keep in mind, just like, me, when I was catching the bugs and critters, I was way bigger than they were, even though I was a kid. Right. And so as a leader in our businesses, we're much bigger. We are very powerful people. And so to not understand and acknowledge our own power is mistake one. And I do a lot of this coaching with women in particular, because for women, standing in their power is even more challenging because we're not taught to do it. But understanding what your power is and the power that you have over the lives of the people that you're impacting day to day in your business, from your customers to your employees, is an extremely important thing. And so then once you understand that, there isn't a conversation an employee can have with you that's going to ruffle your feathers, right? And in fact, the more open you are to like really hearing what they have to say, to nourishing their dreams, to saying, okay, great. Well, I understand this is a stepping stone for you. So here's what I can offer you, right? In the time that you're here. And pretty soon, like 5, 10, 15 years have gone by because they're still learning, they're still growing, they still feel like they're moving forward on their path, right? And they don't feel a need to immediately go out and make a dent, or maybe even their goals have changed. Maybe they, want to be your succession plan or something else. So by, really giving people the freedom to explore and to have conversations with you, you create something that conversely, bonds them to you in a way that clenching tight and trying to keep them from, what's ultimately going to make them happy doesn't do. So I think that's a really important leadership concept. And if you can really, truly, honestly be open, and again, assuming best intent from people when they come to you and tell you these things, it's not always easy for people to say what they have to say. It might not even come out, quote unquote, the right way, the way that you want to hear it. But, all information is good information. So if somebody's really unhappy with something I did in a meeting, my gosh, I really hope they tell me. Because if they don't, what's the downstream impact of that? Maybe I don't want to hear it. Maybe I thought the meeting was great, and now I'm feeling a little, deflated. My balloon's a little deflated or whatever by hearing that. But at the end of the day, if I don't take on that negative information, then I'm not doing my job. So sometimes when things are the noisiest, what I have to remember is that noise is actually a really, really positive sign.
It's funny that you say that. I just went through something like that myself, right? Where we had a meeting, I felt like I communicated something, and it came back to me that it wasn't, that wasn't what came across, right? And for me, I do pride myself in communication and talking to people and listening to people. And to get that feedback, you immediately kind of think, well, I said that, I said it this way, and I remember exactly what I said. But what I've kind of taught myself over the years is to try and take a step back, and sometimes I'm better at it than others, but take a step back and say, okay, if they didn't hear it, you didn't communicate it properly. You should have maybe asked a clarifying question, or maybe been a little bit more crisp in how you communicated it. And I try to be super aware of that, and I still stink at it at times, right? And I think that's the hardest part is, being able to communicate in a way that people are actually, they're taking it in. And I give teachers a lot of credit, really good teachers in schools that are able to kind of figure out how people learn and how they listen and how, how they comprehend what it is that you're saying, because it's not an easy skill. It's not easy to do. And I think we take it for granted, but if you can take a step back and just think about, hey, there's multiple people that didn't get the message of what you were saying. It might be coming from the horse's mouth the wrong way, right? Like just being able to be intentional and listening to yourself and understanding that you're not going to be perfect every time at this.
Yeah, perfection is not even the goal, and communication is messy. So like most human relationships are messy, no matter how great your intentions are, sometimes there's just a gap between your intention and your impact. And so, how you fill that gap is, yes, by listening to people, but also by soliciting their feedback. So there's both a push and a pull, and quieter people sometimes are the most dangerous ones in your business because they're uncomfortable speaking up. And so really, you're going to have to pull that out of them, because you've got to also understand how the people who are not talking to you, how they're feeling, what they're thinking, and making sure that everyone not only has the space, but actually the obligation, to speak up at times, especially when it's the most important kinds of communication, to make sure that that you're getting a robust set of different points of view and feedback about your business from your employees. They're the closest to the work.
Good questions are so important too. When you're having those conversations, to be able to ask good questions and get feedback, that again was a lesson that I had to learn the hard way, where I had a technician that worked for me in a shop, and I had a meeting with him probably 3 weeks prior to this. He came in to put his resignation in, and the 3 weeks prior to that, it was all, hey, I'm super happy where I'm at. I love this place, never going anywhere. And then 3 weeks later, hey, just so you know, I'm leaving. And I'm like, what happened? Like, how did this do this complete 180 on everything that we talked about? And I think if I would have asked maybe some more pointed questions or better questions to be able to solicit that response and really truly trying to understand, and somebody that was seemingly happy, I think I would have gotten further, right? And again, I think these are lessons you learn through experience and trying to go through it, but they're hard lessons to learn.
Yeah, they are really difficult. The payoff, though, is immense. And what I think is, while work isn't all of your life and it's just a piece of your life, what happens when you get better at communication is that actually your entire life gets better, because it doesn't stop when you close the door to work. You don't then revert to your other communication ways, right? It starts to become a part of who you are. And then all of the different aspects of your life actually get better. Your personal relationships, your friendships, other business conversations that you're having with people in industry, your partnerships, your employees. So there's really, really huge, terrific payoff. That doesn't mean it's not uncomfortable sometimes to hear these things, though, right? So, but I think it's our job as leaders, again, to be comfortable being uncomfortable is part of the job.
What do you see as the future in terms of leadership in shops? And I know that's an extremely vague question, but do you think we're trending in the right direction in terms of building better leaders and getting maybe more professionalism in our shops? Do you think it stayed stagnant, worse? I'm curious. You see a lot of shops, so I'm just really fascinated by the collective and how you see it and if we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. So, what's interesting is I think for every kind of downside, there's an upside, right? So we've had some extraordinarily difficult prior few years, right? In the automotive industry in general. So, and as a people, right? The pandemic, I think, wasn't easy on anyone. And look, it's not totally over. Like we're in a new world, and, honestly, I'm like expecting the unexpected. Who knows what's going to happen next? And so I think we're all preparing for that. Certain things are recovering, certain things aren't. We've got a shortage in the skilled trades. So I think that's causing a lot of people to look at things and say, okay, well, how do I attract talent? Because there isn't enough talent to go around. And ultimately, there's a cap to what I can pay and still stay in business and all that. So it can't be just about the money, although, it's certainly important to pay technicians fairly, of course, but it can't just be about the money. It has to be about the culture. How do I create a more diverse and inclusive environment on the dealership side, where formerly like maybe all their marketing and dollars were going into retail, now we're thinking, no, we're thinking about service, right? It's like the service and the profitability is becoming important again, because, oh, well, cars were selling for over retail during the pandemic. So, we were feasting, right? But now we're coming, the price of the cars going back down. We're once again looking at service as being such an important part of our industry. And so when we do that, I think what that creates pressure on leadership and management to do the right things. Aside from that, we're going through things socially, as a nation that I think are pretty important. And we're seeing a lot of statistics about how it's just good business to have an inclusive culture, for example, and to think about how we bring different kinds of people into the industry and so forth. So, look, I am a positive person by nature, so I'm going to see, I'm always going to see that there are, more drops of water coming into the glass. I'm going to see opportunities for improvement, but certainly I'm also going to see those who are making improvements. And maybe I'm in a little of a bubble because, of course, I work with some of the best shops and dealers in business, my personal opinion. But nonetheless, I do see that things are changing, and I do think that they're changing for the better. And I'm excited to be, some small part of that conversation and part of that change.
You certainly are. I think with everything that you do to bring awareness to it, inclusion, I think not only with females, but minorities and anybody that might be out of the normal, right? And I think there's so much opportunity there, and the more welcoming we can become as an industry, the more we, extend the olive branch to be able to say, hey, we're a cool place to work at. Like this is the spot. This is a good place. We'll accept you when you come in. We'll treat you right. The more we can get in that realm, the more we can get in that mindset, the more success we're going to have, the more talent that we're going to have. And look, technology is not getting any easier, right? We're going to need to pull the best and brightest of these young people, regardless of their background, to be able to come into our industry and make a huge impact. And so I think you hit that on the head in that we have to be better in that regard. And I think we're starting to get there. And I think it's because of people like you. It's because of the Women in Auto Care Conference. It's because of all of these things that you are really leading the way on, and you're a big part of. So I appreciate all of your efforts out there, everything that you're doing to make this industry just a better place for everybody.
Well, I would say ditto back to you, Jay. I appreciate your efforts as well. And also just amen to everything that you just said. Well,
and thank you for the partnership with RepairPal. We're huge fans of everything that RepairPal does. I mean, you have been an excellent partner of ours now for several years, and we genuinely appreciate everything. I think our missions are very similar and aligned, and what you're doing out there is fantastic. So I appreciate you taking time today to join me on the podcast. Hope to do it again sometime soon. But it felt like a master class in leadership here. It was so good. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You're always easy to talk to, Jay. I appreciate it and look forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you.
That wraps up this week's episode of Beyond the Wrench. Be sure to tune in next week for another brand new episode. As a reminder, don't forget to rate and follow Beyond the Wrench on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps us get Beyond the Wrench in front of other fantastic shop owners, managers, technicians, and dealers just like you, so we can continue to help improve, promote, and grow this amazing industry. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.